Tae-hwan lay still on the pristine hospital bed, the sterile scent of antiseptic filling the room like a silent warning. Everyone outside the glass walls believed he was trapped in a coma, a shadow of the ruthless Korean mafia boss who commanded fear across Seoul. Only Amara, the young African nurse assigned to his care, knew the truth, or so she thought. She moved quietly, her dark eyes scanning monitors and vials, the faint click of her shoes almost imperceptible against the polished floor. Her heart beat a rhythm of cautious excitement, for though Tae-hwan appeared motionless, she felt a strange presence, a weight in the air that told her he could hear far more than she imagined. The first time she heard him speak, it was almost a whisper, a sound so faint it could have been her imagination. But when her hand trembled over a syringe, he shifted ever so slightly, a flicker in his eyes that was invisible to anyone else. Her breath caught, but she forced a steady calm. "It's just nerves," she told herself, though her pulse betrayed her. This was no ordinary patient. Tae-hwan was a predator wrapped in flesh, and she had already walked too close to the edge. Earlier that week, Dae-woo, one of Tae-hwan's loyal but notoriously cunning lieutenants, had slipped through the door while Amara was changing his linens. He muttered something about rival gangs probing the hospital, eyes darting to every corner as if expecting a hidden assassin. Amara had stiffened, gripping the betrayal, her mind racing with the consequences of one wrong step. Her loyalty to her own conscience wrestled against survival instincts she had cultivated in the rough neighborhoods of Johannesburg. She had grown up learning that secrets could save lives or destroy them, and now she had stumbled into the shadows of the richest and most dangerous man she had ever known. That night, as the lights dimmed and the hum of medical equipment became a lullaby, Tae-hwan shifted again. Amara was adjusting his blanket, humming softly to ease her own trembling, and froze mid-step when she noticed the faintest movement in his hand. He didn't speak, didn't even blink overtly, but there was intelligence in the stillness, a calculated awareness that made her stomach twist. For the first time, she realized that the stories about him weren't exaggerated. He wasn't merely dangerous. He was a master of patience, of observation, of silence. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Hi-Ri, a sharp-featured woman with an inscrutable expression, slipped inside without waiting for a reply. "He's stable," she said, voice calm, but with a hint of urgency. "But you should know, the calls we've been receiving. They're not idle threats." Amara's pulse jumped. "Threats?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but Tae-hwan's eyes, those piercing dark orbs, followed every syllable. She could feel them boring into her back, weighing her words, measuring her honesty. "Yes," Hi-Ri replied, leaning closer to whisper. "They know he's awake. Someone's watching. Someone wants to test his defenses." Amara swallowed hard, the air thick in her throat. The nurse had been trained for emergencies, for chaos, for trauma, but nothing could have prepared her for this kind of intimacy, with danger, this close and palpable, lurking just beyond the hospital room walls. And yet, she had to maintain composure, to move, to act as if every step was ordinary, mundane, routine. She could not afford a misstep. The cost could be life itself. Ayana's voice echoed from the hallway, soft but deliberate. "Amara, are you sure he's really asleep?" The young African aide's question sent another ripple of tension through Amara. She had always thought she was careful, but the truth was fluid here. Each sound could betray her. Each movement could reveal a secret. She wanted to say nothing, to act as if everything was normal, but the room seemed to press against her, constricting, like the walls themselves knew her anxieties. Tae-hwan shifted slightly again, just enough to hint at awareness, and Amara's hands trembled as she replaced the four-line. Minutes stretched like hours, and every small sound a distant cough, the beeping of monitors, the shuffle of shoes in the corridor became amplified. Tae-hwan's breathing was steady, but the subtle flex of his fingers, the micro twitch of an eyebrow, spoke volumes. He was listening, always listening, and in that silence, Amara's mind raced with questions she had no right to ask. Why had he not revealed himself? What was he testing? Her own curiosity wrestled with a deep, instinctive fear. Then, a new sound, a low knock, deliberate and measured, made her freeze again. Lalzi, A tall, muscular African aide who had appeared briefly a week prior, stepped inside with the folder. "Orders from outside," he said, placing it carefully on the counter. Amara's eyes flicked nervously toward Tae-hwan, who remained motionless in appearance. Yet she could feel a pulse of awareness radiating from him like electricity. She handed over the folder to Hai-ri, who gave a curt nod and opened it, scanning the contents with a precise, professional detachment. The papers contained information that chilled Amara to the bone. Rival gangs, movements, potential assassins, every contingency plotted meticulously. Yet among the detailed threats, one name leapt out, a name she knew, intimately familiar and dangerous. Her throat went dry as realization hit. Tae-hwan's hand moved, just slightly, curling over the blanket as if acknowledging that the secret had been observed. Her heart hammered in her chest. This man, who could command fear with a glance, had just silently communicated a message. He knew. He knew everything. As the night deepened, the room grew colder despite the heaters, and Amara found herself unable to stop scanning his face for clues, for patterns, for intentions. Tae-hwan's eyes, shadowed under the hospital lamp, betrayed nothing, yet every subtle shift, every almost imperceptible muscle movement, carried meaning. She realized, with a shiver, that she was no longer merely a nurse tending to a patient. She had become part of a dangerous chessboard, pieces moving invisibly, lives hanging on the precision of observation. She moved to check the monitors again, trying to focus on mechanical readings to distract herself from the tension coiling in her stomach. And then, the faintest of sounds, almost imperceptible, a rasped breath, a quiet exhale made her stop. Tae-hwan's eyes flickered to hers, slow, deliberate, and a faint smile touched the corner of his lips. It was almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. He had been awake the entire time, observing her, judging her, weighing every decision she had made. Amara felt a mix of fear, awe, and an inexplicable fascination. And in that moment, the understanding hit her like a sudden storm. Everything she had done, every secret she had tried to conceal, every careful step she had taken, had been witnessed. Tae-hwan's game was not about brute force, not about dominance through fear alone. It was about control, about observation, about bending reality so subtly that she had never known when she had crossed the line between life and death. Amara's thoughts scattered as she stepped back, hands pressed against her chest, struggling to keep her composure. Outside the door, footsteps approached once more, the faint echo of voices she could not quite discern. Tae-hwan's gaze remained fixed on her, a silent reminder that the room was not just a space of healing, it was a battlefield, and every word, every motion, every heartbeat mattered. The night stretched on, a tense, unbroken stretch of shadows, whispers, and half-seen movements. And somewhere in that continuous, charged silence, Amara knew, with the certainty that froze her in place, that nothing in her life would ever feel ordinary again. Tae-hwan's secrets, the rival plots, the fragile threads of loyalty and betrayal, they all converged here, in this quiet, suffocating room, and she was trapped at the center of it, aware, vulnerable, and irrevocably entangled. The night deepened, thick with shadows that clung to the corners of Tae-hwan's hospital room. Amara's hands hovered over the monitors, her pulse pounding as she tried to calm herself. She had convinced herself that she could handle this, that she could maintain a professional distance. But every subtle twitch of Tae-hwan's hand, every flicker of those dark, calculating eyes reminded her that this was no ordinary patient. This was a man who thrived on control, on observing the smallest details, on twisting the perception of reality till even his most loyal aides second-guessed themselves. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Lalzi stepped in, carrying a tray of medicines. His presence was both reassuring and unsettling. She had grown to trust him in small ways, yet the knowledge that he, too, operated in a world full of secrets kept her cautious. "Everything's on schedule," he said quietly, setting the tray down. His eyes flicked toward Tae-hwan, and in that glance was a silent acknowledgement of the tension in the room. Amara's stomach twisted. Even the simplest gestures felt loaded with meaning. As she administered the medication, she noticed a subtle shift in Tae-hwan's gaze, one that made her stop mid-motion. He wasn't just observing her, he was reading her, decoding every hesitation, every micro-expression. Her throat tightened as the weight of the realization pressed on her chest. She had crossed an invisible line hours ago, perhaps even before she realized it, and now he knew. Hyrie appeared again, slipping inside without warning. Her presence carried an edge, a precision honed by years of navigating danger. "There's a situation outside," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "A rival gang has gotten wind of his location. They're probing the hospital. Someone could be watching." Amara's eyes widened. Her hands shook as she clutched the blanket, unsure whether to move closer to Tae-Hwan or stay at a distance. His gaze remained fixed, calm yet piercing, as if he were already several steps ahead of any threat. The tension was suffocating. Every creak in the hallway, every distant sound became magnified, a signal of impending danger. Amara's mind raced. She knew the stakes. She had seen the reports, the outlines of rival plans, the whispered threats that now seemed to swirl around her like a storm. Yet, despite the fear, she couldn't look away. Tae-Hwan's presence demanded attention, a magnetic force that made her heart race with both terror and an inexplicable fascination. Minutes stretched endlessly, each second a fragile thread of suspense. Then Ayana's voice, soft yet deliberate, floated from the corridor. "Amara, are you certain he's asleep?" Her question sliced through the tension like a knife. Amara's stomach clenched. How could she answer? To admit uncertainty would expose her fear, but to lie would be reckless. She kept her composure, whispering, "He's stable," but the truth echoed in her mind. Tae-Hwan was anything but asleep. Suddenly, a soft movement caught her attention. Tae-Hwan shifted ever so slightly, his hand brushing against the blanket, almost imperceptible. Her breath hitched. He had just confirmed what she feared. He was awake, fully aware, and silently testing her. Every motion, every word, every heartbeat in the room was under his scrutiny. The thought made her shiver, a mix of awe and fear coursing through her veins. Lalzi moved closer, seemingly oblivious to the silent war unfolding in the room, yet Amara knew better. His calm demeanor masked a mind alert to every detail, every hidden signal. He adjusted the 4 lines, his hands steady, precise, but his eyes flicked toward Tae-Hwan with a subtle acknowledgement. They both understood the rules of this dangerous game. One false move, one misjudged reaction, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Then, from the hallway, a faint murmur of voice, neither hers nor Luozi's, sliced through the tension. Dae-Woo. He appeared with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to danger, holding a folder that seemed heavier than its weight. "Plans have shifted," he said, voice low. Amara's heart skipped. She had seen the rival movements in files, the charts predicting every conceivable move. And now, with Dae-Woo's arrival, she realized that the chessboard had just expanded, each piece moving faster than she could track. Tae-Hwan's eyes followed every motion, unblinking, unrelenting. A flicker of a smile crossed his lips, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it sent a shiver down Amara's spine. He knew, he had always known, and in that knowing, there was power, a quiet, suffocating command that left her both terrified and inexplicably drawn to him. Hours passed with a rhythm of silent observation. Every whisper, every footstep, every shuffle of papers outside the room seemed magnified, a constant reminder that danger lurked beyond the walls. Amara moved with cautious precision, each action deliberate, every step a negotiation with fear. She had trained for emergencies, for trauma, for chaos, yet nothing had prepared her for the intimacy of this tension, the razor's edge of proximity to a man who could destroy with thought alone. Then, unexpectedly, Tae-Hwan's hand twitched again, small but deliberate. Amara froze. Was it a warning? A test? Her mind spun with possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. And in that instant, a wave of realization washed over her. He was not only aware of her actions, but also orchestrating every moment, guiding, nudging, controlling the atmosphere like a maestro with a symphony of shadows. Her focus returned to the monitors, trying to anchor herself in routine, but the beeping, the hum of machines, and the faint flicker of movement at the corner of her vision made concentration almost impossible. She glanced at Hyrie, who maintained her professional calm, and Ayana, who hovered near the doorway, silent but watchful. Everyone in the room was a participant in this unspoken, high-stakes game, yet none could match Taehwan's mastery. Suddenly, a soft sound, a barely audible rasp of breath, made her glance up. Taehwan's eyes met hers, dark, piercing, unyielding. There was no malice, no overt threat, just a profound understanding that left her breathless. He had observed her, judged her, and yet, in that same gaze, there was a glimmer of something she couldn't name. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps amusement, perhaps a silent acknowledgement of her courage. Amara's mind raced, thoughts colliding in a storm of fear, respect, and something unidentifiable. She understood then that this night, this room, this silent tension, had become a crucible. Every secret she had guarded, every step she had taken, every heartbeat had been witnessed. And Taehwan's awareness wasn't merely about control. It was about understanding, predicting, bending reality until survival and truth became inseparable. The distant sound of footsteps echoed again, drawing Amara's attention to the corridor. She sensed, rather than saw, the presence of someone moving, calculating, waiting. The room, already charged with suspense, seemed to pulse in rhythm with her own heartbeat. Taehwan's subtle movements, his deliberate silence, and the faint curve of his lips hinted at unseen plans, layered and complex. She realized with a shiver that she was no longer merely a caregiver. She had become an unwilling participant in a game that spanned shadows, secrets, and whispered threats, where every glance could change the outcome. Hours slipped into an oppressive quiet, punctuated only by the faint beeps of machines and the near imperceptible shifts of bodies in the room. And yet, Amara knew that within the silence, decisions were being made, tests administered, and allegiances silently measured. Taehwan's gaze remained fixed, unwavering, a constant reminder that the game had only just begun. She adjusted the blanket over him, trying to steady her own shaking hands. Each movement felt monumental, heavy with consequence, yet she had no choice but to proceed, to exist within this tension, to act as if normalcy was possible. The subtle interplay of shadows, breaths, and glances created a ballet of suspense, a dangerous harmony where one misstep could unravel everything. And then, just as dawn hinted at the horizon, Taehwan's hand moved again, more pronounced this time. Amara froze mid-breath, aware that this single gesture carried meaning beyond her comprehension. Her eyes met his, and in that unspoken moment, she understood fully. Survival here required not just caution, but intuition, courage, and the willingness to navigate a labyrinth of unseen intentions. The early light of dawn seeped through the blinds, painting the hospital room in pale streaks of gold and gray. Taehwan remained motionless to anyone who looked in, but Amara felt every calculated breath he took. The night had stretched long, filled with subtle tests, micro-movements, and unspoken threats, yet she had survived it. Or so she thought. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the monitor, the steady beeping of his heart, now a familiar rhythm, almost comforting, if only slightly. But deep down, she sensed the calm was a fragile illusion. Without warning, a low hum of distant voices floated from the hallway. Amara froze, ears straining. The sound was deliberate, almost choreographed, like a warning she wasn't supposed to hear. She pressed herself against the wall, barely daring to breathe. Taehwan's eyes flicked toward the sound, not with surprise, but with anticipation. Amara realized, with a shiver, that he had expected this. That subtle smile from the night before resurfaced, fleeting yet deliberate, as though he had been orchestrating events beyond the hospital walls. The door opened quietly, almost politely, but the figure that stepped inside was far from benign. Dae-woo, normally precise and composed, carried a folder clutched tightly in his hands, his expression unreadable. But the moment Amara caught sight of the document tucked beneath his arm, not formed in her stomach, there was a file with her name on it. Her eyes widened, heart racing. How could he have accessed this? She had been careful, meticulous, every note, every detail, hidden. Yet here it was, staring at her like a verdict. Taehwan's gaze did not leave her. There was no movement in his body, no hint of emotion, yet the intensity of his presence was suffocating. It was as if every secret she had carried into this room had been stripped bare, laid out for judgment. Amara's pulse raced. The tension between them thickened, so palpable it was almost visible. Dae-woo cleared his throat, stepping closer. "Boss, there's something you need to see," he said, voice low, hesitant. Amara's stomach twisted. She didn't move, didn't speak, afraid that any sudden gesture could tip the balance. Tae-hwan's eyes flickered toward Dae-woo, and she noticed it, then a shift in his breathing, subtle yet deliberate, a sign that he was fully aware of what was about to happen. Slowly, Dae-woo unfolded the papers on the counter. Amara's gaze involuntarily followed. The contents made her gasp. Hidden among innocuous medical logs and routine schedules were photos, coded messages, and intercepted communications, proof of an alliance she had no idea existed, linking someone she trusted to Tae-hwan's rival gangs. Her mind spun. The thought of betrayal, so carefully concealed until this moment, sent a wave of vertigo through her. And then it hit her, the twist she hadn't anticipated. The betrayer was not a stranger. It was Ayana, the young African aide she had briefly met in the hallway days ago. Her hands trembled as she realized the scope. Ayana had been feeding information to Tae-hwan's enemies all along. The realization felt like ice through her veins. Amara had thought she understood the loyalties of those around her, had relied on subtle alliances and mutual trust, yet she had been blind. Tae-hwan finally moved. Not much, just a subtle shift in his posture, but the command in that movement was enough. Dae-woo froze mid-step, aware that the slightest miscalculation could provoke Tae-hwan's fury. Amara's hands clenched, the papers still burning her fingers metaphorically, though she hadn't touched them. Tae-hwan's eyes met hers, pierced and yielding. No words were needed. He had known, all along, about the treachery. That faint, infuriating smile returned, just at the corner of his lips, a smile that both warned and fascinated. A soft sound echoed from the corridor. Lalzi stepped into view, his expression tense but calm, as if he had anticipated every possible outcome. Amara's mind raced. Every person in this room had a role. Every movement was calculated, and she was trapped in the middle of a web spun by Tae-hwan's genius. She felt small, fragile, yet unable to look away, unable to move. The danger, the tension, the suffocating awareness of every breath around her, anchored her in a fear she could not escape. And then, the real twist. Ayana herself appeared, almost casually, as though oblivious to the unfolding storm. She stopped at the threshold, eyes darting between Tae-hwan and Amara. I can explain," she began, voice trembling. But her explanation hung in the air, incomplete, fragile, like a thread about to snap. Tae-hwan's gaze hardened, and Amara felt a silent command radiate from him. The room, the people, the very air itself, was under his control. Amara realized, with a shiver, that she had been a pawn, yes, but also a witness. Every secret, every betrayal, every shadowy movement, had been observed. And in that observation, Tae-hwan had woven a larger, more dangerous game, one that she had only glimpsed the edges of until now. Ayana's words faltered, caught between fear and the desperate need to justify herself. Tae-hwan did not speak, but the slow, deliberate blink, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, was enough. He was considering, calculating, weighing the cost and benefit of every move. Amara felt the weight of inevitability settle over her. Whatever decision he made, it would ripple beyond this room, beyond these walls, beyond her own understanding. And in that suffocating moment, Amara felt the full gravity of what she had stepped into. She had believed she was merely a caretaker, a nurse tending to a fragile patient. But the reality was far darker, far more intricate. She was now embedded in a dangerous labyrinth of power, betrayal, and silent threats, where every glance, every gesture, every unspoken word carried consequence. Tae-hwan's presence was absolute, his mastery undeniable, and the stakes impossibly high. Hours passed, heavy and tense. Every shadow seemed alive, every whisper a potential trap. Amara's thoughts raced, mind balancing between fear and fascination, survival and loyalty. Tae-hwan observed everything silently, with a precision that both terrified and awed her. The room itself seemed to pulse with the dangerous intimacy of their shared secret. a rhythm she could not escape, could not ignore. And just when she thought she could take a breath, a subtle sound, a soft click, almost like the turning of a key, made her freeze. Taejuan's eyes narrowed slightly, and Amara realized that this night, this room, this delicate balance of observation and deception, was far from over. Something, she did not yet know what, was about to tip the scales, and the game was about to become far more perilous. The tension in the room had thickened into a suffocating fog, each breath weighed down by the knowledge of betrayal, observation, and hidden motives. Taejuan finally shifted, a slow, deliberate movement that seemed almost imperceptible, yet in its subtlety contained a force that made Amara's heart skip. He had observed, calculated, and waited for the precise moment to act. And now, the moment had arrived. Amara's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted his blanket, aware that the slightest misstep could trigger consequences she couldn't yet comprehend. She met his gaze, searching for a clue, any hint of intent, but found only calm, meticulous control. Taejuan's silence was a weapon, sharper than any gun or blade, and she felt its edge slicing through the room. Ayana's voice broke the suffocating quiet. I can explain everything. Please, you have to understand. She stopped abruptly, eyes darting nervously between Taejuan and Amara. Taejuan's gaze didn't waver. His quiet intensity seemed to stretch, enveloping the entire room. The faint smile he had worn the night before was gone, placed by a shadow of cold, analytical precision. Amara felt a shiver run through her spine. Her mind raced, torn between loyalty, fear, and the unexplainable pull she felt toward him. She had grown attached to this fragile, terrifying dance of proximity, yet now, the stakes had risen to an entirely new level. Taejuan was no longer merely testing her awareness. He was measuring her reaction, her allegiance, her ability to survive within his carefully constructed web. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured, every word deliberate. Amara, did you suspect Ayana before this? There was no accusation in his tone, only observation, but the weight of it pressed down on her chest. She hesitated, heart hammering. The truth was dangerous. To admit that she had felt unease could signal suspicion or weakness, yet to lie could be equally perilous. She swallowed hard. I noticed some inconsistencies, she admitted softly, voice barely above a whisper. Taejuan's gaze sharpened, assessing every nuance of her confession. Amara felt exposed, vulnerable, yet a strange exhilaration coursed through her veins. She realized with a jolt that this was no longer a simple game of survival, it was a test of character, of instincts honed under pressure, of courage measured against fear. Daewoo stepped closer, placing the folder of intercepted communications carefully on the counter. He avoided direct eye contact with Amara, as if acknowledging the gravity of the unfolding situation. Taejuan's eyes flicked toward him briefly, a subtle signal that the next move was his alone to decide. The room seemed to hold its breath, each second stretching into eternity. Amara's thoughts were interrupted by the faintest sound, a soft click, almost like a lock disengaging. She stiffened, instinct screaming. Her eyes darted toward the door, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she felt truly unsteady. Lalzi had positioned himself near the doorway, body tense, eyes scanning. Yet even he could not shield her from the storm that was silently gathering. Taejuan finally rose slightly, lifting the blanket with a precision that seemed effortless. Amara's pulse spiked. He moved toward the counter where the documents lay, his hand hovering above them before decisively flipping through the pages. Every gesture was deliberate, controlled, calculated to maintain his dominance while revealing just enough to unsettle. Amara watched, captivated and terrified, as he silently analyzed every betrayal, every subtle hint of treachery, every hidden intention. You underestimated the reach of those outside these walls, he said quietly, his eyes locking onto Ayana's. Loyalty is fragile, and perception is everything. His words, calm and measured, cut sharper than any blade. Ayana's eyes widened, fear flickering across her face like a candle about to be snuffed out. Amara felt a chill run down her spine. She understood then that Taejuan's strength did not lie in brute force, but in his mastery of awareness, anticipation, and the subtle manipulation of fear. Amara's own hands shook as she realized her role in this delicate balance. She was no longer merely a nurse tending to a patient. She was a participant in a high-stakes chess game, where each action, each glance, each word carried immense weight. Her loyalty, her courage, her intuition all were being tested simultaneously. She took a shallow breath, steadying herself, willing her hands to remain calm despite the storm raging in her mind. The first true twist of the morning came without warning. A soft beep from one of the monitors signaled a security breach not in the hospital, but within the communication lines. Tae Hwan's eyes narrowed. His lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly, but the subtle motion was enough to signal awareness and calculation. Someone, somewhere, had attempted to intercept his intelligence, and he had known. The layers of his foresight, previously invisible to Amara, became startlingly clear. Amara's heart raced as she glanced at him, realizing that she had been navigating this labyrinth blindly. Tae Hwan had anticipated every scenario, every misstep, every heartbeat. And yet, despite the fear, there was an inexplicable magnetism to his presence, a pull that made her keenly aware of the gravity of every choice she made. Then, as if orchestrated for maximum effect, Hyri entered once more, her expression calm, but her eyes flicking rapidly over the room. "Boss, the outside threat is closing in faster than we anticipated," she said. Amara's stomach knotted. She had feared exposure, betrayal, the subtle shifts in alliances, but the realization that danger was literally approaching now elevated the tension to unbearable heights. Tae Hwan's gaze swept over everyone in the room, pausing on Amara long enough to make her feel the weight of his scrutiny. Her mind screamed with fear, yet she could not look away. Every subtle expression, every measured breath, every whispered calculation, had significance. The silent power he wielded was absolute. And in that knowledge, Amara understood that this moment was pivotal not merely for her, but for the entire web of loyalty, betrayal, and survival that surrounded them. And then, without warning, Tae Hwan leaned slightly toward Amara, his voice a low murmur meant for her alone. "You must decide, will you protect what you know, or will you let fear dictate your actions?" His question, quiet yet piercing, struck her with the force of inevitability. The room, already heavy with suspense, seemed to compress, every sound amplified, every shadow elongated. Amara realized with a jolt that she was not just being tested. She was being molded, refined, and positioned at the very heart of a storm that could consume everyone in its path. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated only by the distant hum of equipment and the occasional subtle shift of bodies. Amara felt herself teetering between terror and exhilaration, aware that every heartbeat was a negotiation with destiny. The stakes had risen beyond her comprehension, yet she could not deny the thrill of the challenge, the sharp edge of adrenaline that kept her senses razor sharp. And as Tae Hwan finally settled back, his gaze sweeping the room one last time before the first hints of sunlight fell fully across the hospital floor, Amara understood a chilling truth. This was only the beginning. The real game had begun, and every secret, every hidden intention, every loyalty and betrayal would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. The tension, the suspense, the unrelenting weight of observation, it would follow her, haunt her, and define every choice she made in the hours to come. The morning sun had barely broken through the blinds, casting thin, pale lines across the hospital room. Amara's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted Tae Hwan's blanket, still reeling from the revelations of the night. Betrayal had clawed its way into the room, subtle but undeniable, and the air was thick with anticipation, heavy as though every molecule carried a warning. Ayana stood near the doorway, her expression a fragile mix of fear and defiance, unsure how to navigate the dangerous currents she had unleashed. Tae Hwan finally moved, slow and deliberate, the faintest tilt of his head enough to command attention. His gaze, unyielding and precise, rested on Ayana. Amara felt her chest tighten. This was no ordinary confrontation. Every micro-movement, every flicker of muscle, every unspoken syllable mattered. Tae Hwan's power had always been silent, but now radiated through the room like a tangible force, bending the behavior of everyone present. "Step forward," he said, voice low, almost calm, yet carrying a weight that made Ayana's knees tremble. She moved hesitantly, aware that any false gesture could trigger consequences she could not anticipate. Amara's mind raced. She had feared betrayal, but witnessing it unfold under Taehoan's control was a lesson in precision, observation, and manipulation. She felt herself pulled into the center of the storm, a participant in a game she barely understood, yet could not escape. Ayana's voice broke first. I did what I thought was necessary. I didn't know how else to. Her words faltered, swallowed by the gravity in the room. Taehoan's gaze did not waver. It pinned her in place, dissecting every syllable, every inflection, every flicker of fear. He had no need to raise his voice, no need to gesture wildly. The room itself seemed to respond to his presence, the tension amplifying, the shadows lengthening, as if the walls themselves obeyed him. Amara's eyes darted between the two, heart racing. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she realized that her role had shifted once again from observer to nurse, to key witness, and perhaps even protector. Every heartbeat in the room carried weight. Every breath was a decision point. Taehoan's silent authority left no room for mistakes. Then, with a sudden, subtle motion, he leaned forward just enough to tilt Ayana's perception. The faintest touch of his fingers brushed the edge of the folder she had brought, sending a small stack of papers to the floor. Amara's hands flew to catch them, heart skipping. Taehoan's lips curved into a near-invisible smile, a subtle signal of control and orchestration. He had engineered the moment so that Ayana would reveal more in her own panic than any direct question could elicit. I need you to understand something, he said softly, voice almost intimate, yet every word struck with the precision of a blade. Loyalty is not merely obedience. It is recognition of consequence, awareness of trust, and the courage to uphold it when everything around you threatens to collapse. Ayana's breath hitched. The gravity of the statement wrapped around the room, tightening like a vice. Amara felt the chill of realization. Taehoan's strategy was psychological, surgical, and absolute. Ayana's lips quivered. I thought I was helping. Her words broke under the weight of his gaze. Taehoan did not interrupt. Instead, he allowed silence to stretch, making her fill it with confession, guilt, fear, tools he wielded more effectively than any weapon. Amara watched, captivated and anxious, understanding fully that this was more than punishment. It was education, correction, domination. Then, with the flicker of movement, Taehoan shifted his attention briefly to Amara. Her stomach twisted. She had survived scrutiny, observation, and tests of loyalty, yet the intensity of his gaze made her feel as if every thought, every intention, every hesitation had been exposed. And in that moment, she realized the subtle thrill that terror brought. Her mind sharpened, her senses heightened, and an undeniable connection formed through shared danger and silent understanding. Ayana stumbled back, voice breaking entirely. I'm sorry. Taehoan's hand moved, almost imperceptibly, signaling Lalzi to step closer and secure the documents. Amara's heart pounded. The room was a delicate equilibrium, every participant bound by the gravity of Taehoan's mastery. No one moved without his permission, yet every movement was a silent negotiation of survival. And then, the real manipulation became clear. Taehoan leaned forward, closer to Ayana, his presence overwhelming, and whispered, "You will remain here under observation. Your choices from this moment forward will define your path. Understand? Every action, every hesitation, every thought is now under scrutiny." His tone carried no threat, no malice, only absolute command, the kind that left no room for argument. Ayana's eyes welled with tears, yet her nod was immediate, almost involuntary. Amara's mind raced. The intensity of the control, the precision of the psychological manipulation was staggering. Taehoan did not merely punish. He reshaped, guided, and commanded without raising his voice or striking a blow. The power was invisible, yet undeniable, and Amara found herself drawn further into the web, part observer, part participant, part student of the man who seemed to bend reality with presence alone. Minutes stretched into hours, each one laden with tension and subtle lessons. Tae-hwan's gaze occasionally flicked to Amara, assessing, judging, silently guiding. Every small interaction became a test of awareness, loyalty, and courage. The minor characters Lalzi, Hai-ri, Dae-woo acted as extensions of his strategy, their movements precise, calculated, subtle, adding layers of suspense without overt action. Amara realized fully that this was no longer a simple case of nurse and patient. She was now entwined in a larger web, her every decision potentially tipping the balance between survival and disaster. The thrill, the terror, the electric tension coursing through her veins was addictive, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. Finally, as the first real light of day crept across the floor, Tae-hwan reclined slightly, still watching, still commanding. Amara's mind was racing, heart pounding, awareness heightened beyond normal limits. She had survived observation, she had witnessed betrayal, and now she had glimpsed the subtle artistry of manipulation at its peak. The room, silent except for the hum of monitors, seemed suspended in time, every shadow, every movement a note in Tae-hwan's symphony of control. And in that charged silence, Amara knew with absolute certainty that nothing in her life would ever feel ordinary again. She had stepped into a world where observation, loyalty, fear, and fascination intertwined in ways she had never imagined, and where Tae-hwan was always several steps ahead. The hospital room was quiet now, but the silence was heavy, like a held breath waiting to explode. Tae-hwan sat upright, fully awake, his gaze sharp and unyielding, scanning every shadow, every movement. Amara's hands trembled as she adjusted his blanket, her mind racing. The night's betrayals, the psychological games, the constant testing, it had all led to this. Outside, the city was alive with danger. Rival gangs were closing in, unaware that their every move was anticipated. Lalzi and Hai-ri moved with silent precision, their presence almost invisible but utterly crucial. Amara realized her role had shifted from passive observer to active participant. Every glance she made, every subtle action, was now a piece of Tae-hwan's plan. Her pulse raced, fear and adrenaline combining into a razor-sharp focus. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a player in a dangerous game she barely understood, yet could not escape. Amara, Tae-hwan said softly, eyes never leaving the monitors tracking the corridors. Trust is tested when chaos arrives. Observe carefully, react only when necessary, understand the flow, and you survive. His words were calm, almost gentle, but carried a weight that made her chest tighten. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, feeling the electric tension spike as distant footsteps approached. The first intruder slipped into the hospital through a back entrance, silent and calculating. Tae-hwan's hand twitched subtly, signaling Lalzi and Hai-ri. In a few coordinated moves, the intruder was neutralized, unconscious, and unarmed. Amara's heart hammered as she realized the precision of Tae-hwan's control. The intruder hadn't even realized he'd been caught. The subtle orchestration of chaos, anticipation, and decisive action was terrifying and mesmerizing all at once. Then came Mayana, standing near the doorway, silent, her previous betrayal hanging in the air like a shadow. She could not escape. Tae-hwan's gaze swept over her, calm yet dominating, and she flinched under its weight. "You see now," he said softly, voice low but sharp enough to cut through any hesitation. "Loyalty isn't a word. It is measured in understanding consequences, in knowing the stakes, and in acting wisely when the world threatens to collapse around you." Ayana's lips quivered. She nodded, wordlessly acknowledging the lesson she had been forced to learn. Amara's breath caught. The stakes had risen beyond her comprehension, and yet, through fear and tension, she began to see clarity. Tae-hwan's mastery wasn't merely brute strength or intimidation, it was calculation, observation, anticipation. Every gesture, every silence, every subtle glance, was part of a larger plan, a strategic dance that she was now a part of. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire echoed outside the hospital. It was chaotic, uncontrolled, yet inside, Tae-hwan's world remained precise and methodical. "Stay here," he said to Amara, motioning subtly toward Lalzi and Hai-ri. "Observe." Intervene only if necessary. The flow of action is mine to control. She nodded again, heart pounding, fully aware that her next choice could mean life or death. The intruders, realizing resistance, attempted to breach another corridor. Tae-hwan moved, a shadow among shadows, swift, deliberate, lethal. Amara watched, terrified yet mesmerized, as he neutralized each threat with surgical precision. He did not raise his voice, did not act out of anger. Each move was deliberate, measured, and chillingly effective. Amar understood fully now why the rumors about him had spread like wildfire. He was invisible until he struck, and unstoppable when he did. By the time the last of the intruders fell, unconscious or fleeing, the hospital was silent again, but the tension lingered like smoke. Tae-hwan returned to the bed, reclining calmly, eyes flicking to Amara. "You've seen the game fully," he murmured, voice low. "The rules are simple. Awareness, loyalty, courage. Apply them well, or be swept aside." Amara's chest heaved, the adrenaline slowly ebbing into awe and exhaustion. Ayana remained silent, humbled, her betrayal corrected not by punishment, but by subtle, undeniable mastery. Amara understood the lesson for herself as well. Fear sharpened, observation strengthened, and courage became survival. She had been tested, guided, and molded into a participant capable of making decisions under pressure, aware that her every action now carried weight. The distant hum of the city began to filter through the hospital walls, a reminder that danger was never truly gone. Tae-hwan's eyes scanned the horizon, unblinking, calculating. "Today is over," he said finally, "but tomorrow will test us again. Always be ready, always observe. Survival depends on awareness." Amara allowed herself a breath, finally, letting the tension slip slightly. She realized she had been transformed by fear, by challenge, by exposure to a man whose control over life, death, and human behavior was absolute. Tae-hwan's mastery was not just physical, it was psychological, subtle, and utterly dominating. And as sunlight streamed across the floor, the hospital room, once a silent arena of observation, now felt like a crucible. Every lesson learned, every move calculated, every fear faced had prepared her for the world she now inhabited. It was not a world of normality or comfort, but a world of strategy, consequence, and constant vigilance. Amara met Tae-hwan's gaze one last time, feeling the unspoken understanding between them. She would survive, she would adapt, and she would observe because in his world, awareness was power, and power belonged to those who dared to act decisively in the shadows. The storm had passed for now, but both knew the next test was inevitable. And Amara, changed forever by the night, was ready.